The summer of 1993 came in dry across the bottomland farms of Pickens County, South Carolina, and by the middle of July it had not rained in 31 days. The red clay in the lower fields had cracked into plates. The upper rows were worse. And at the end of a gravel road 3 miles east of Dacusville, a man named Elton Garner stood in the middle of a cornfield that smelled like dust and disappointment and looked out at 4 acres of stalks that had stopped growing 3 weeks ago. He was 61 years old, had been working this same land since his father handed him the keys to the old International Harvester in 1958. 35 years of planting, waiting, harvesting, starting over. He knew what failing crops looked like. He knew the particular color of a cornstalk in its last week. The leaves go pale at the edges first, then brittle. Then they curl inward the way paper curls over a flame. His stalks had that color. The forecast said no rain for another week. Possibly 2. The county extension office had already sent 1 notice reminding farmers that emergency irrigation credits were available. Elton read it at the kitchen table, folded it in half, and set it under the leg of a table that had wobbled for years. He did not file for the credit. Not yet. He had something else in mind. His neighbors knew Elton Garner as a careful man, not flashy, not given to experiments. He ran 44 acres of mixed-row crops and kept his equipment clean and his books in order, and generally did what everyone else in Pickens County did, because it mostly worked and the risk of trying something different was usually not worth the downside. That was the reputation. It was accurate, mostly. What people did not know was that Elton had spent the winter of 1992 reading. He had found, on the shelf of the Easley branch of the Pickens County Library, a soil science pamphlet from the mid-1970s, published by the University of Florida, Agricultural Extension. 42 pages, stapled through the center, the cover stained with something brown. Inside, a section on what the pamphlet called terra preta, translated in a footnote as dark earth. The description of this soil, found originally in the Amazon basin, had interested Elton enough that he checked out the pamphlet 3 times over the winter. On the 3rd visit, the librarian told him to just take it. He drove back through the bottoms that March, the pamphlet folded in his chest pocket, and he started hauling wood ash and charred oak from the burn pile behind the equipment shed. What happened over the next 30 years is not complicated to describe. It is harder to explain why it worked as well as it did, for as long as it did, in soil that the county agronomist had formally classified in 1988 as moderately degraded. But the numbers make a plain case, and Elton Garner was a man who kept records. The idea behind the pamphlet was not new, even then. Somewhere around 2,500 years ago, people living in what is now Brazil were farming land that had no business being farmed. The Amazon basin soil is notoriously thin. Strip the forest canopy, and within 2 or 3 seasons the nutrients leach downward, and the growing layer turns pale and exhausted. It had happened to every European colonizer who tried to farm there, and it happened quickly. But archaeologists digging in certain riverbend areas in the 20th century kept finding pockets of soil that was black and deep and rich and still active, still teeming. This soil had not been exhausted in 2,000 years. Tests showed elevated carbon, elevated microbial activity, elevated phosphorus retention. The cause after study turned out to be charcoal, not charcoal left over from fire, exactly. Charcoal that had been deliberately incorporated into the soil, mixed with organic waste, worked in over generations. A kind of soil amendment that the people who created it had never written down and never patented and never sold. Elton Garner had read 6 pages of a summary of this and found it plausible. That was enough for him. He started small, 300 square feet in the corner of his soybean rotation field, the southwest quadrant nearest the tree line. In March of 1993, 4 months before the drought, he had dug in 40 pounds of hardwood charcoal from the burn pile. Not charcoal lighter fluid briquettes. Raw char from oak and hickory that he'd burned himself, slowly in a covered steel drum with restricted airflow to keep it from ashing down to nothing. He mixed it into the top 8 inches of soil with a walk-behind tiller. Added composted manure from the cattle pen on the adjacent property, 60 pounds of it, and turned it again. Watered it once, left it. The neighbors who saw him working that corner in the thin gray air of a March afternoon did not ask what he was doing. They could see it was something unusual. Burned material going into the ground instead of coming out of it. It looked, from the road, like a man making a mistake on purpose. Leon Dupree, who farmed the 80 acres to the west and had been doing so since 1966, mentioned it at the feed store in Dacusville the following Saturday. He did not say it was foolish. He just said he hadn't seen it before. The men at the counter agreed that they hadn't seen it either. Elton heard about this from his son-in-law, who had been at the feed store buying wire. His son-in-law did not repeat what had been said in detail. He didn't need to. Elton kept working the corner plot. By April, he had expanded the amendment area to a 1/4 acre. Still southwest quadrant, but deeper into the field now. He mixed in another 80 pounds of char, and this time added a 50-pound bag of crushed oyster shell he'd ordered from an agricultural supplier in Colombia. The shell added calcium. The charcoal was not just carbon mass, it was porous, riddled with tiny channels that could hold water and harbor the bacteria that broke organic matter into plant food. The oyster shell would help stabilize the pH in soil that tended toward acid. He was working from memory and logic and a 42-page pamphlet, not from a laboratory, and he knew the difference. The summer of 1993 came and the rain stopped and the stalks in his main field went pale the way he knew they would. He watched from the road with the same expression he kept for all bad weather news, which was no expression at all. The main field had 38 acres in corn that year. The southwest 1/4 acre was in soybeans, small enough that you could miss it if you drove past fast. He didn't miss it. The soybeans in the amended section held color for 8 days longer than anything around them. He walked in on the 9th day with his notepad, the old spiral-bound one with the green cover he had kept records in since 1977, and measured leaf tension with his fingers and estimated moisture in the top 2 inches of soil by how far his pocket knife blade pushed in before it. Found resistance. The amended section 3 inches before resistance. The row immediately adjacent, unamended same field, 1 inch, maybe less. He wrote this down. Date, measurement, weather conditions, temperature at 6 a.m. and again at 2 p.m. He had been doing this in that notepad since 1977, and the entries were brief and consistent and completely uninteresting to anyone but him. By August, the county extension agronomist had driven past Elton's property 4 times without stopping. His name was Richard Folse. He had been the county agronomist for Pickens and Oconee counties since 1985, held a master's degree from Clemson, and had seen a fair amount of unconventional farming in his career. He stopped on the 5th pass, on a Tuesday afternoon in late August, when the temperature was 97 degrees Fahrenheit and the roadside grass had gone the color of old straw. He walked the main field first. The corn was stressed. Some of it was gone. He made notes on his clipboard. Then he walked the southwest section. He stood at the edge of the amended 1/4 acre for close to 4 minutes. The soybeans there were not thriving. The drought had taken something from everything, but they were standing, green in the center leaves, yellow at the margins, not brown, not curled, standing. Folse came to the house and knocked. Elton brought out 2 glasses of water and they sat on the porch steps, not inside, because Elton did not know this man well enough to sit him at the kitchen table. Folse asked what had been applied to the southwest section. Elton told him. Hardwood char from the burn pile, composted manure, oyster shell, mixed into 8 inches. Folse looked at him for a moment. He asked how Elton had arrived at that combination. Elton told him about the pamphlet. Folse asked if he could borrow it. Elton said he'd look for it. He never offered it to Folse again, and Folse never asked twice. The drought broke in September. The corn loss that season ran to about 40% of the main field yield. Not ruinous, but not comfortable. The soybeans in the amended section finished at 32 bushels per acre. Elton's unamended soybean rows in the north field finished at 19. The county average for soybeans in Pickens County in the drought year of 1993, 17 bushels per acre. He wrote those numbers in the green notepad and underlined them once. The following spring, Elton expanded the amended area to 3 acres. He burned his own char through the winter, 2 steel drums running slow burns every other weekend from October to March. He collected wood from the property edges, oak, hickory, some cedar, and burned it in batches, covered drums, restricted air, long smoldering burns that took 8 to 10 hours. The resulting material was black and light and crumbled easily between the fingers. Not ash, which goes gray and dissolves in rain. Char, which holds its structure and persists in the soil for decades. He mixed it at a rate of roughly 4 pounds per square foot in the top layer, same oyster shell addition, same composted manure. A neighbor named Curtis Webb came over one Saturday in March to help with the tilling and did not say much about what he was working into the ground. Curtis had seen the soybean numbers from the previous fall. He had heard them from Leon Dupree, who had heard them from the county extension office's monthly crop summary, which Folse circulated in November. Curtis tilled without comment. He asked Elton what he thought the long-term effect would be. Elton said he didn't know yet. That was the accurate answer. By 1996, the amended acreage had reached 11 acres. The green notepad had been replaced by a second one, same style, bought at the same drugstore in Easley. The data in it covered 3 full seasons across 2 crop types, soybeans and sweet corn, and showed a consistent pattern. In normal rainfall years, the amended section yielded between 12 and 18% above the unamended fields. In the dry summer of 1995, which was not as severe as 1993, but below normal for June and July, the gap widened to 31%. The soil itself had changed in a way Elton could feel before he measured it. The color had deepened. The amended sections had gone from the red-brown clay characteristic of Pickens County bottomland to something noticeably darker, not black, but the color of good dark chocolate in the places where the char concentration was highest. It held moisture differently. It drained faster when saturated, which mattered in wet springs, and released moisture more slowly when dry, which mattered in every other season. The worm count had changed too. Elton had never counted earthworms before 1994, had never thought to, but Curtis Webb mentioned it one afternoon, and Elton started doing it as a rough index. In a standard shovel-depth column of unamended field, he counted an average of 4 to 7 worms across 7 test spots. In the amended sections, the average was 18. In the densest amended areas, near the center of the southwest quadrant where 3 years of char application had accumulated, he counted 26 in one shovel pull. He wrote this in the second notepad with no additional comment. Richard Folse retired from the county extension office in 1999. His replacement, a younger man from the Greenville office named Paul Brinson, visited Elton's farm in the spring of 2001 as part of a routine acreage survey. He walked the fields with Elton in the early morning. The air's still cool and smelling of wet clay and new corn. Brinson asked the same question Folse had asked in 1993. What had been applied and how? He took more notes than Folse had. Asked about the char production method. Asked about the application rates. Asked about the oyster shell. He stayed for 2 hours. He asked to look at the green notepads. Elton brought them out, both of them, the original and the second. Brinson sat at the kitchen table this time and read through the entry slowly. He was there long enough that Elton made coffee. Brinson took photographs of selected pages with a small camera he kept in his shirt pocket. He published a case study in the South Carolina Agricultural Extension quarterly newsletter in the fall of 2001. The title was Biochar Soil Amendment in Pickens County, an informal 8-year record. He described Elton's method, his application rates, his yield comparisons. He noted that the approach aligned with recent academic interest in Amazonian dark earth, and that the informal data, while not meeting scientific study standards, was consistent and suggestive. The newsletter had a circulation of about 800 farmers across the upstate region. Elton received 17 phone calls in the 2 weeks after it ran. He answered all of them, told each caller what he had done and what he had spent and what the outcomes had been. He did not exaggerate. He told 2 callers that the method had not improved yields on his north field, which had different drainage characteristics, and that he didn't fully understand why. He told another that the char production was time-consuming, and that he had considered whether the labor offset the benefit and had concluded that it did, but that others would have to make that calculation for themselves. 3 farmers from Oconee County drove out to see the fields in person that October. Elton walked them through. Leon Dupree, who had been saying nothing about the charcoal experiment for 8 years, stood at the fence line and watched these strangers come to look at his neighbor's ground. He did not come over that day. The following spring, he asked Elton if he would help him start a burn drum of his own. Elton helped him build it, welded from a salvaged 55-gallon drum, the lid cut to fit and hinged with flat bar stock, the same design Elton had been running since 1993. It took one Saturday afternoon. The summer of 2003 brought the driest August Pickens County had recorded since 1954. The county extension office issued a drought advisory. 2 farmers in the lower end of the county lost complete corn crops. The emergency irrigation assistance applications ran 40% higher than the previous record year. Elton's amended fields, now covering 28 of his 44 acres, came in at 79% of normal yield. His unamended north field, the 16 acres with a drainage problem he had never solved, came in at 52%. He noted both figures in the third green notepad, the one he'd started in 2000. Leon Dupree's amended section, 4 acres, 2 growing seasons of char application, came in at 71% of normal. His unamended sections averaged 49%. These numbers circulated at the feed store without anyone making a formal announcement. They were just known. Richard Folse, retired and living in Anderson County by then, heard about the 2003 results secondhand through his former assistant who had taken a position with the State Agricultural Board. Folse sent Elton a postcard. The postcard said that he had been thinking about that summer conversation on the porch steps and that he was glad the experiment had worked out. It was signed R. Folse. Elton kept the postcard in the green notepad. Third one, he did not write a response. He kept amending, kept burning, kept adding char at the same rate. 4 pounds per square foot, top 8 inches every third year. Not every year. He had learned early that over-application created a layer that sat too dense in the soil profile, and that a 3-year rotation gave the microbial activity time to work the carbon into the structure properly. This was not from the pamphlet. He had figured it out himself, slowly, by watching what happened when he pushed the rate and what happened when he eased it. In 2007, a graduate student from Clemson's soil science program drove to Dacusville to take core samples from the amended sections of Elton's field. The student, whose name was Marcus Teal, had read the 2001 Extension newsletter case study and had been looking for an informal long-term biochar application site to study. He took 14 core samples across 6 locations, measured carbon concentration, microbial counts, pH, phosphorus retention, and water holding capacity at 3 depths. He stayed 2 days, camped in his truck in the equipment shed with Elton's permission. His analysis found that the amended sections of Elton's field contained, on average, 340% more stable carbon than comparable unamended Pickens County bottomland soil. Microbial activity was elevated by a factor Teal described in his paper as statistically significant. Water holding capacity in the top 6 inches of the most heavily amended sections was 4 times higher than the unamended control samples from the same property. He submitted the paper to the journal Geoderma. It was accepted the following year. Elton received a copy in the mail. He read it. Some of it, the sections he understood, which was not all of them, but enough. He kept it in a manila folder with the Extension newsletter case study, the postcard from Folse, and the original 42-page pamphlet from the Easley Library that had started all of this. He did not attend the presentation Teal gave at Clemson in 2009. He was 77 years old and did not drive long distances anymore. Teal sent him a printed copy of the presentation slides. Elton looked at them once and put them in the folder. In 2010, a feature piece ran in the Greenville News about biochar farming in the upstate. Elton's farm was mentioned in 2 paragraphs. His name was spelled wrong in the first edition. They corrected it in the online version. The phone calls started again after the newspaper piece, more this time than in 2001. Elton answered all of them, same as before, same answers, what he did, what it cost, what it produced. No claims beyond what he had measured. No guarantees beyond his own 17 years of notes. He continued farming the 44 acres until he turned 80 in 2012. That autumn, he transferred the property to his daughter and her husband, who had been farming adjacent land of their own since 2003. The burn drums came with the property. The green notepads, 3 of them by then, filled front to back in small, steady handwriting, went to the house. His daughter kept them on the shelf above the kitchen table. The amended fields kept producing. In 2018, Elton's daughter mentioned to a reporter from the Pickens County Progress that the southwest quadrant still showed visibly darker soil than the surrounding acreage, even a quarter century after the first char application. The reporter asked if she still used the method. She said she did. Roughly the same application rate, same char production from the same burn drums. One of them the original from 1993, the other a replacement built in 2004. She was getting 14% better average yields in the amended sections compared to the unamended North Field. Normal rain years. In the dry summer of 2016, the gap had been 29%. She still had the pamphlet. Elton Garner passed in the spring of 2021 at 88, in the farmhouse where he had lived since 1958. The green notepads stayed on the shelf. The burn drums stayed in the shed. The soil in the southwest quadrant was still darker than the red clay around it, still holding more moisture than it had any geological right to hold, still producing on ground that a county report from 1988 had called moderately degraded. The amendment had been worked in for the last time in 2011, The year before Elton stopped farming it himself. 10 years had passed. The carbon was still there. The worms were still there. The method outlived the man who carried it from a library shelf in Easley to a quarter-acre corner of a South Carolina cornfield in the dry March of 1993, still working, same drums, same ground, still producing.